Well, I'm so glad that you guys are all here again to join us tonight on this session 2 of this spring semester. I said last week, just so you know, or I'm going to keep saying last week, 2 weeks ago, just so you know what to expect when you come here. It's pretty similar every time. You're going to come in, grab a snack. We're going to probably sing just one song, and it's probably going to be, if you're really like you want to know what's going to happen, it's going to be that song. So we're going to sing that song when you come here. And then I'm going to give a talk, and we're kind of in this series of talks in Titus 2. I'll get you caught up if you weren't here the last time. But we're going to have a talk, and then we're going to have a time of discussion with the ladies at the table you're at. So you get to hear the message, and then you also get to kind of process through it, discuss with the women at your table. And then we always like to end the night with prayer. So we want to end with asking you, is there anything that we can pray for you? And I just want you to feel welcome to share whatever it is you want prayer for, whether it's big or small. I know that the women at your table would love to pray for you in the next 2 weeks. That's kind of like the cool part about this opportunity of being here. And hopefully, you brought your journal back from last week. If you didn't get one, if you weren't here, grab one of those. Hopefully there's still some on the tables out there. But the point of the journals, the goal that I had with these was that when people ask for prayer, it's hard to remember everybody and what they ask for prayer for, so that you could write people's names down. You could write what they want prayer for. You could be praying for them throughout the 2 weeks. And then you could ask them when you see them next time, how is that going? I've been praying for you. So hopefully, if you didn't get one, you can grab one of those. And then lastly, if you haven't already, join the group on the app, because that's a cool way to be able to communicate with the whole group at once. I'm actually going to as soon as I get done talking, I'm going to put the discussion questions in there. So if you're already in the group, it's going to pop up on your phone, because I know it can be hard to see all the way up here. So that way you can just look at the app and you can see the discussion questions on your phone. So if you haven't done that already, you can do that while I'm talking. Just join the Acts Women group on the app, and then we'll all be on the same page together. Does this sound okay? Can you guys hear me back there? All right. Sounds a little echoey. I don't want to be too loud for you guys, but I hope everybody can hear me. So last time we were together, we talked about femininity and what it is that we believe about femininity. The word femininity, it just means qualities or attributes that are characteristics specifically of women. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about femininity. And I talked about how as Christian women, we might need to deconstruct a little bit of what we believe about femininity, because a lot of what we believe is not from the Bible. It hasn't been built up from God's word. It's been formed by the culture that we're a part of. It's been formed by the family that you grew up in. So the goal of us coming together for this semester is for us to get a biblical view of femininity. And to do that, we're looking at this chunk of verses in Titus 2. And I think that it's going to give us a good foundation when we talk about biblical femininity. So I introduced you to this passage last week, and I'm going to read it again for you tonight. It says this in Titus 2, 3-5. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, to be kind, and to be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God. So we're given these 7 things in this verse. Paul outlines these, and like I explained last week, it was to this church on the island of Crete, and he's giving these instructions of how to create a healthy church, what a Christian family looks like, what a Christian woman looks like. So he identifies these 7 things, and these are things that are important to us as women. So the very first thing on the list is to love your husband. So this is going to be our focus for tonight. How many wives do we have here tonight? Okay. Tonight is going to be most applicable if you are a wife, but I hope that you won't check out if you're pre-marriage, if you're post-marriage, if you've never been married, Because like I explained last time, the goal is that even if this doesn't have direct application to you, we want to be spiritual mothers. Like the verse talks about, us doing this verse would be us growing to be spiritual mothers, to mother women who are younger in faith than us, right? That we would encourage the faith of women who aren't as far along as us. So it's important that we have a biblical perspective of this. Even if you're never going to be married, even if you've been married and you're like, I'm not going to be married again. It's important for us to know so that we can help women in the church, because you're going to be surrounded by married women when you're in the church and just in your life. So this is important for all of us to know. I realized last time we were together, I didn't introduce myself, and I don't feel like I need to, because I feel like this is just like a group of my friends, like we're getting together, but then I'm like, oh, I don't know a lot of you. Like when I look around, I don't know your name, I haven't got to meet you. So I just wanted to introduce myself, that my name's Amy, and I am Cameron, our lead pastor of Acts. If you come to Acts, some of you don't, so you might not even know my husband, but so I'm Cameron's wife. We've been married for 12 years. And we have 4 kids. So we have Silas, who's 8, Levi, who's 6, Isla, who is 4, and Willow, who is 2. And I am a stay-at-home mom. So I'm with my kids mostly all the time. I homeschool them. So that's where I am a lot of the time. That's how I spend my days. And I actually did help plant the church. I was on our church plant team, so I've been here since the beginning. But I don't do a ton these days besides this. This is kind of like the primary thing I do, because I'm mostly taking care of our kids. If you've been here on the weekends, you know, like when I do welcome, I introduce myself as Cameron's wife. And people have been like teasing me a little bit about that and like be like, why do you introduce yourself that way? They think it's like odd or like kind of goofy sounding. But to me, I don't know, it just made sense to me. Like if Cameron came to my place of work, he'd be like, oh, I'm Amy's husband, right? It's like how you know each other. But I thought it was funny that people were kind of like teasing at me about that, but it's okay. I'm proud of it. I'm not ashamed. But I fully realized that, you know, not all of us are married, not all of us will marry, and not all of us will remain married throughout our lives. So being a wife doesn't make you more feminine. You know, if you never get married your whole entire life, that doesn't make you less of a woman. That doesn't make you less feminine. But being a wife is an important part of our femininity, because it's something that's specific to us as women. If a man gets married, he doesn't become a wife, he becomes a husband. And the Bible even makes this distinction between us as men and women. When we get married, we're husbands and we're wives. We're called to different things. So it's really important that we get this right. I don't want to spend a ton of time talking tonight about what culture would say about marriage and what our culture believes about being a wife, because you already know that. We're surrounded by that 24/7. We live in that. I don't need to tell you about it. But what you might not know is what the Bible has to say about marriage, about being a wife. So I just kind of want to start there. In Proverbs 18:22, it says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." And I told you this list of 7 things that Paul has given us, they're not comprehensive of what the Bible would say about femininity, but they're a good start. And it's good for us as we look at these things down the list to look at what the whole Bible says about them. So we have these 3 words, you know, love their husbands. But what would the Bible as a whole say about women loving their husbands, say about us as wives? Well, it says this in Proverbs 31:10 through 12. "An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life." So the Bible says an excellent wife is extremely valuable, and being a wife, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a demeaning thing. And it's a good thing where if you're not married and you have the desire to be a wife, the Bible would say that's a good thing. That's a good thing that we would desire as women. That verse also kind of illustrates like a healthy relationship between a husband and wife. If you've never seen that before in your life, what a biblical, healthy marriage would look like. It says that, the wife, she does her husband good and not harm, and that he trusts her. So the Bible speaks really highly of marriage. And it even talks about how marriage is a picture of Jesus and the church. It's this beautiful illustration that God lets us live out while we're here on earth. And it speaks very highly to the role of a wife as well. So if you're here and you're a wife, that's amazing. The Bible would say you're a good thing. Some translations even say treasure. That word for good thing is also said as a treasure. So even if you don't feel like it, that's what the Bible says you are. You're a good thing and you're a treasure. So the word that I have for you tonight, looking at Titus 2, is that you should love your husband. And you might be thinking like, yes, I love him. Done. What else is there to know about it? I do his laundry. I've had his children. I love him. But there's a little bit more to it. The form of Greek that the New Testament was written in, it has at least 4 words to distinguish various types of love. And you may have heard of them. There's agape, which is that sacrificial, unconditional love. There's storge love, which is like a familial love that you have between family members. There's eros love, which is the passionate, sexual type of love. But none of those would be the word that's used here. The word that's used in Titus 2:4 is phileo. And phileo is the kind of love that would describe very close friends. It's a tender and affectionate kind of love. It emphasizes enjoyment for the other person. So as wives, we're to love our husbands with this kind of love, with this phileo or tender love. So another way that you could say it is to teach the young women to like their husbands. Not just love their husbands, but to actually like them, because phileo isn't a love out of obligation. It's like a love that you have for your best friend. You don't have to love your best friend. When you call or when you text back and forth, when you set up a night to go get margaritas, it's not because like, oh, I have to do this. It's just because you want to. You like spending time with that person. You probably laugh with that person. You enjoy their company. And that's a picture of phileo love. And that's the instruction here for us as wives, that we would love our husbands in that way. And it's interesting because when this is given to wives, when the command comes to love our husbands, the word phileo is always used for love. Whereas when husbands are instructed to love their wives, in Ephesians 5:25, where it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, that word is agape. And then even Cameron talked about at men's this last week, in Titus 2, men are instructed to have a sound love. That word is agape as well. So men are instructed to have that agape love, while we're instructed to have phileo love. So the distinction is interesting. And I wonder, could it be that the Bible is encouraging us to love in ways that might not necessarily come natural to us? Men are reminded to love with agape. Women are reminded to love with phileo. And so it's interesting that the Bible makes that distinction. There's a quote from this book that I read about this subject, and it says, "Women are fully capable of loving a man and sacrificing for him while believing the whole time that he is a true and unvarnished jerk. Women are good at this kind of love." I don't know if you can relate to that or not, or maybe you've known a relationship like that, you observed something like that. But I think as women, agape might come a little bit more naturally to us. We might be a little bit more long-suffering and be able to just love and hang in there even when the feelings might not necessarily be there. We can do his laundry, we can make his lunch for years and years, even though we don't really like him. But this call, this command for us as wives, it's more than just serving them, tolerating them, putting up with them. We're to love them with this tender and affectionate kind of love. So when I talk about this kind of love tonight, I'm going to use the word tender a lot, but I'm just talking about that phileo love, that tender love. And this is kind of what I want you to picture when I say that. Just like a little plant, like a fragile little plant. It's fragile. It needs to be protected because it can easily be damaged or killed or choked out. And it needs to be cared for. It needs things to keep it growing, to keep it strong, and keep it alive. So first, I want to just point out two things that can kill tender love. If you are married tonight, do you remember the first time you met your husband? Or maybe like the first few dates you went on with him? Do you remember the feeling that you had? Excitement, nervousness, maybe even there was like some infatuation, a little bit of obsession in the beginning, right? As the relationship started. And as you began to see each other, the time just seemed to pass so quickly. You could talk for hours and hours and it just felt like it went by so fast. I know I am not a night owl at all, but when we were dating, we would hang out till like 1, 2 in the morning and I'd have to work at like 8 a.m. the next day just because you just love being with that person and the time just seems to fly by. You find any excuse to see each other, right? Cameron would always come visit me when I was working. And there's this excitement and thrill in the relationship at first. I remember the first time he grabbed my hand to hold it and it was in front of people and my heart was pounding. But have you noticed that doesn't last? Maybe from your own experience or maybe just from observing other people's relationships, that excitement and those feelings of falling in love, they don't seem to last. And there's actually a name for it. It's called limerence. I don't know if you've heard of limerence before, but limerence is the state of mind resulting from romantic feelings for another person. But limerence doesn't last. And scientists have studied this, it can only last for 2 to 3 years max. And after that, those feelings, even like the reaction from your body, it lessens with time. So if you've been married more than a few years, the period of limerence in your relationship has come to an end. When you see, his phone, his name light up on your phone, your heart doesn't like leap, When he comes home at the end of the night, you probably don't get butterflies in your stomach and get nervous. When Cameron grabs my hand, my heart does not pound out of my chest anymore. Of course, you love him, but the thrill and excitement that you once had has faded over time. And I don't think this is a bad thing. This is just a fact. Limerence, it doesn't last. Time is one of the things that can kill that tender love. The other thing that can kill tender love is sin. And ever since sin entered the world through Adam and Eve, sin has entered our DNA as humans, and that is our bent. That is the way we naturally go, is towards sin. And we don't love in the way that God intended us to love because of the fact that sin is in the world. So if this tender love, this affectionate love, if it was just natural for us, we wouldn't have to be taught. And if it was natural for us, we would just do it. But it's not natural for us. Sin is actually what's natural for us. And sin tends to kill this tender love. Selfishness, bitterness, jealousy, pride, these are all sins that can be in our hearts and really choke out the tender love that we have. In marriage, there's always that temptation to focus on the other person's sin. That's naturally what we want to do. But taking a look at the sin in our own heart can really help us grow in grace for the other person. How can we have a tender love for a husband that maybe seems undeserving of it? A good way is to look at our own hearts, look at the sins that we've been forgiven of. Remember how much Jesus has given us mercy and forgiven us. And when we remember that, he loved us even when we didn't deserve it, we can love others when they don't deserve it. The Bible says we can extend unlimited mercy and forgiveness to others because Jesus has been so generous in mercy and forgiveness to us. And it says this really plainly in James 2:13. It says, "There will be no mercy for those who have not shown mercy to others. But if you've been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you." And this is such a countercultural concept, especially in marriage, because culture would say, well, if he's being a jerk to you, be a jerk to him. If he's being cold to you, you be cold to him. You treat others the way they're treating you, but that's not what we believe as Christians, right? We treat others as we want to be treated. And if we want mercy from God, we have to first give mercy to others. In marriage, we're both sinners, and God is actually using the marriage to grow godliness in us. I like the way this one book I read forever ago, Sacred Marriage, says it, that God created marriage not to make us happy, but to make us holy. The goal isn't that marriage is going to meet all your emotional needs and fulfill all your desires that you have in your heart. It's that the marriage is going to make you more like Jesus. And we have to be intentional about killing that sin and recognizing that sin lurking in our hearts, because sin will kill this tender love. So instead of holding on to bitterness and selfishness, we have to be generous with mercy and forgiveness. So those are a few things that can kill tender love. But what are some things that can help this tender love grow? Because like I said, it's like this little plant. So you want to be careful to weed out the bad things, but then you also want to do good things so that it can grow strong and that it can last for years and years to come. So how do we cultivate this tender love for our husbands? Well, the first thing that you can do is remember what made you love him. Do you remember what first attracted you to your husband? Maybe it's been a lot of years. It's been a while since you've thought about it. What did you like about him? Was it the way he looked? Was it that he was very kind? Was it that he was really smart? Was it that he was a hard worker? I know when I think back to one of the things that attracted me to Cameron, it's funny because we knew each other for a long time. We grew up in the same church together, so we were very familiar with each other. But then when we kind of started pursuing this relationship together, and we were older, we knew each other, but not on a deep level. So when he asked me to go out on a date with him, I was a little bit nervous because I was like, oh, he's so serious. I had only seen him leading things and being a college pastor and being the, head guy of things. And I was like, oh my gosh, are we just going to talk about the Bible the whole time? How is this going to go? But I remember being surprised that he was so goofy and he was so funny and he made me laugh a ton. We didn't exchange memes back then, but if we did, we have the same sense of humor. We would have the same memes, laugh at the same things. So his sense of humor and the fact that he made me laugh so much, it was very attractive to me. It was what made me like him in the beginning. And then his love for Jesus and his character was another thing that I remember that I loved about him when we were dating. I admired it about him because he didn't just go to church, he loved Jesus. He had a real relationship with him, and we would just spend hours talking about God and about our faith. And so that was really attractive to me at first. So I remember what made me fall in love with him, but it's easy to forget because we become familiar with each other. I don't get impressed on a daily basis by his love for Jesus anymore, sadly, because I'm so familiar with it. We've been together so many years and I'm used to it. I probably take for granted the fact that he still makes me laugh all the time and that he's funny because I've gotten used to it. I've gotten familiar with it. If you want tender love to grow, it starts in what your mind. It starts in your mind with what you think about your husband. Again, if you're married, what are the things you think about your husband? Not just the big things, who he is as a person, who he is as a man, but on a daily basis, what kind of thoughts go through your head about your husband? What goes through your head when you see that garbage overflowing everywhere? What goes through your head when you get that text that he's going to be working late again tonight? He's going to be working overtime. As wives, we frequently face these situations where we can be tempted to think harsh and critical thoughts. And it's natural for us to fix our thoughts on those things, on the bad things, on the things we think they could be doing better, on their weaknesses, the ways that they're coming up short. But thinking these thoughts kill tender love. I love what it says in Philippians 4:8. It says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise." So tender love, it starts in our minds with what we choose to think about, because we can choose what we think about. We can choose to fix our thoughts on the annoying things, the things that we don't like, or we can choose to fix our thoughts on what is actually true. And I love that because, I can choose to fix my thoughts on the fact that I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I've been with my kids for 14 hours straight, and I can fixate on that. Or I can fix my thoughts on what's actually true, that my husband is a great man. And the reason he's gone is he's working for us to provide for us. That's what's actually true. And so we can fix our thoughts on those true things, and that's going to help tender love to grow. I want to read you this quote because this is by an older woman with more wisdom than me, but this is what she says. Are you in love with your husband? Not do you love him? I know you do. He's been around a long time and you're used to him. He's the father of your children, but are you in love with him? How long has it been since your heart really squeezed when you looked at him? Why is it you have forgotten the things that attracted you to him at first? Your husband needs to be told that you love him, that he's attractive to you. By the grace of God, I want you to start changing your thought pattern. Tomorrow morning, get your eyes off the toaster or the baby bottles long enough to look at him. Don't you see the way his coat fits his shoulders? Look at his hands. Do you remember when just to look at his strong hands made your heart lift? Well, look at him and remember. Then tell him you love him. Will you ask the Lord to give you a sentimental, romantic, in love kind of love for your husband? He will do this. So sin and those critical thoughts, they kill tender love. Think about what you're thinking about your husband and remember why you love him. Remember the things that attracted you at first, why you married him, and then fix your thoughts on the things about him that are true and good. Choosing to fix our thoughts on the good is like watering. It's like caring for that little plant. It's going to help it grow strong. The second thing that you can do to grow this tender love is to remember your promise. If you're here and you're married, you made a promise. You went in front of your family and your friends and before God, and you looked your husband in the eyes and you made a promise that you would cherish him. I don't know if you remember that or not, but you said most likely in your vows to love and to cherish. And you might not even know what that word cherish means, but cherish, it means to hold dear, to care for tenderly, or to nurture, to cling fondly to, or to treat as precious. And that sounds a lot like phileo love, right? We promised that we would love and cherish our husbands. So I don't want to even tells us to do this, but we actually all promised to do this already if you're married. But it's easy to lose sight of this because I think it's our tendency to point at the other person and say, you aren't holding up your end of the promise. You're not doing what you promised to do. In our culture, love is such an emotional thing. It's a feeling so often. And the concept of love being a choice is pretty foreign. To honor a promise, even though the feelings might not be there, it's a pretty foreign concept in our. But as Christian women, we do believe that the covenant we made before God, the promise that we made to our husband, that it matters, and we should do our best to honor what we promised to do. So what does it even look like to cherish? A million different ways, I think. But I think it's important to remember it's not agape. It's not that dutiful love. It's not a sexual love. So I think that the best way to picture it is just like the best friend kind of love. How do you treat your best friend? What do you do with your best friend? How do you feel around your best friend? You want to spend time together, I assume. You laugh together. You think of that person. You maybe buy her something when you see something that reminds you of her. You make plans for the future together, to get together or to go on a trip together. Well, it's just the same kind of love. It's saying that we should have that kind of love for our husbands. And you can love your husband with a tender love simply by just enjoying being together. I think that's one of the main ways, spending time together, looking for opportunities to carve out time to do this. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to go on the fancy date night. Maybe all you really need to do is set this down and turn the TV off and do what you used to do. I love Pastor Craig Groeschel. He says, if you want what you once had, you have to do what you once did. So what did you do at first? When I think back, we just sat around a bonfire and talked for a long time, went for a walk and talked. Do some of those things, whatever those things that you did at first. If you want that tender love that you once had, do those things again. You can cherish him by praying for him, encouraging him, telling him that you love him, being happy to see him. If your best friend just walks in your house, how do you greet that person? Probably like, hey, how's it going? Oh, I'm happy you're here. How do you greet your husband when he walks in your house? Hey, maybe, if that. Smiling at him, hugging him. That might freak him out at first if he's not used to that. Greeting him like any other person that you would who would walk through your front door. So often we're just so familiar with people that we don't even treat them like we would an average person who walks in. And I'm totally guilty of that. The first thing I usually do is here, take this child. So I definitely need to work on that. But the definition of cherish, it says to treat as precious. So how do you treat someone who's precious? That would give you your answer of how you would cherish someone. Treat them like precious. Do that for him. So this phileo love, it's characterized by joy and delight. So tender love can grow when we remember and we honor the promise that we made to cherish our husbands. And then the third thing that we can do is remember to ask God for help. And this is the most important of the three things if you want that tender love to grow in your heart. As I said earlier, this love doesn't come naturally for us. If it did, we wouldn't need to be taught it. And if it did, we wouldn't need God's help. And if you've been a Christian for a while, you know that God often calls us to things that we can't do on our own so that we will ask God for help. And maybe you're thinking tonight as we've talked, this is an area that I am weak in. You feel like I really don't do well at this. I feel like I'm failing in this area. That's actually a really great place to be if that's so. I love this part in the Bible, and this is Paul. He's talking about his conversation that he's having with God, and he's talking about this area that he just feels really weak in. And it says this, he says, each time he said, God said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. When we recognize our weaknesses, it's a chance for us to ask God for help and to wait for him to supply that strength that we need. Because when we're weak, he's strong. And then we can be sure that his power is what's working through us. We've been talking a lot this year too about obedience. And one thing about God is he loves to honor our obedience. So as we begin to walk in obedience, I believe that he's going to help us. He's going to give us strength. And then when we do find ourselves growing in this area, when we do feel that tender love growing, we'll know that it was all him, that it was his spirit working in you. We all need God's help in this area because this is foreign to most of us. I don't know what kind of relationships you observed growing up, what your parents' marriage was like, grandparents, but maybe you've never really seen an example of a wife showing this kind of phileo love to her husband. And if that's the case, I think it's encouraging to know that the women who this was written to at first, the women on the island of Crete, they were probably in that very same situation, this completely pagan culture, no model of a Christian family whatsoever. They probably had no idea even where to start, how to work this out practically. So we need God's help to help us live this out. And I believe that if we ask him for help, he's going to help us. There's this quote by Howard Hendrick, and it says, if your Christianity doesn't work at home, it doesn't work. Don't export it. It's ouch every time I read that quote. As Christians, our call is to love God and to love our neighbor, right? We say it at Acts every single week, love God and love everyone. And this starts in our homes first. If you want more people to know about Jesus, if you want to love your community, you want to love unbelievers so that they come into a relationship with Jesus, it starts by the people closest to you. It starts by loving them well. As we talked about last time, the whole point of this verse, the whole point of trying to do these things and cultivate these things in us is that so other people would see the gospel in our lives, is so that we would bring honor to the gospel. So the way you love your husband, it's more than just for his benefit. It's not just so he'll have a happy life. It's actually to be a picture to unbelievers. It's to be a picture of the gospel to your children, to your family members who don't know Jesus, to your neighbors, to all the people looking from the outside in at your life. So when you love in this way, not out of obligation, but out of joy, it's countercultural. And when you love your husband through the seasons of life, through the years, when you love him with this tender sort of love, it's going to be such a beautiful picture of the gospel to those around you. Maybe there's some of you here tonight and you're married, but you would say that tender love is completely dead. Like if that's like a little plant, like it's gone, there's no more, it's completely dead and there's no life left. Maybe there's been betrayal in your relationship, there's been deep hurts and things said that you just can't get past. And you would say like, there is absolutely no tender love and I can't even imagine that love coming back again. And if that's you, I just want to challenge you to take the next step. I want to encourage you to talk to someone. Our pastors are really accessible here at our church. You know, you can literally text Cameron at any time. Deb is also here. I would also be happy to talk to you. But to take the next step, because God doesn't want you to live in that way. God wants better for you in a marriage than to just be like, well, it's gone and it's never coming back. But maybe you are going to stay in the marriage. You need to figure something out with that. You might need to sit down with a pastor. You might need to like get marriage counseling together. So I just want to encourage you to take the next step in that. But I also want to speak hope to your situation. Even if you think like, man, I could never love him with a tender love ever again. You know, we serve a God who is really good at bringing dead things back to life. And he's really good at taking what the enemy meant for evil and using it for good for your life. So even if you're in a really rough spot, in Jesus, there is hope for healing and there's hope for restoration. I've seen God do miracles in people's marriages. So don't lose hope completely, but take a next step. Do something, have someone pray for you, share it with someone so that you can move on with your life. If you're a single woman here tonight, maybe you're pre-marriage, maybe you do see yourself getting married someday, I'm really happy that you're here tonight. And I hope that if nothing else tonight, you would be reminded on how profound the decision is of who you choose to marry. It's the second most important decision you'll ever make in your life after accepting Jesus. It's going to be picking that person who you marry. So learn from others' mistakes. Don't make the mistakes yourself. Specifically on this topic, marry someone who you have a great friendship with. Marry somebody that you don't just love, but you like them. Pick somebody who is your best friend, who you would just enjoy spending time with more than anyone else. It's going to make the rest of your life so much easier. Showing him that phileo love, it's not going to be a struggle for you. You might need to be reminded from time to time, but it's not going to be an all-out struggle in your life if you have that foundation of a great friendship. And then if you are post-marriage or you're divorced, you're a widow, and you think, I'm probably not going to get married ever again, I just want to encourage you as well, just to think about the call to be a spiritual mother and how that's something all of us should want to do. It's something that we all can do. The verse doesn't give any qualifications as far as relationship status. You don't have to be a married woman to be a spiritual mother. You don't have to be married for a certain amount of years. You can be single. Whatever your relationship status is, you can be a woman who encourages other women in this way. And you might say, I don't even know where I would start, like as a spiritual mother to help another woman. Well, this is a great start. This is the first thing on the list, that you would encourage other women who are married to love their husbands with this kind of love. And then if you're married tonight, all of us started with this tender love, but somewhere along the way, it may have faded. Time or sin may have choked it out. But if you want that tender love to grow, if you want to nurture it and make it strong again, you can remember what it is you love about your husband, what you admired about him. And maybe it's been a while since you've thought about that. And I just encourage you to take some time this week and just think about that. Remember kind of the things that drew you to him in the beginning. When those critical thoughts enter your mind, don't get fixed on them. Fix your thoughts on the good things, what's true and good and excellent. Remember what you promised him, and then remember to ask for God's help. Don't try to do it all on your own. And if this is an area where you think, man, I really do need God's help in, tonight is a great opportunity. Ask the women at your table to pray for you. You're not a bad wife if you admit, this is an area I struggle in. None of us are perfect in this area. We all have room to improve and do better at this. I know I definitely could get better at this. So I told you last week that my goal this semester is to answer some questions. One of the questions is like, what is biblical femininity? So one aspect of it is that we love our husbands, not just tolerate, but we love our husbands with a tender love. This is what sets apart biblical femininity from the femininity that we see in our culture. And our ability to love a husband with this tender sort of love over a lifetime, that's a unique quality of a godly woman. So I want to keep talking about this in our discussion tonight. I have some questions for you that you're going to talk through with your table. And the first is this: who comes to mind as an example of a woman who loves her husband with a tender love? Maybe you had a really great mom and your parents had a good relationship, or your grandma or an aunt, or maybe you don't know any. Maybe there's like a book or a show, a fictional character, anyone that comes to mind as like an example of a woman who loves with this tender sort of love. We're going to talk through that. And then second, a question for the married woman: what was it about your husband that made you fall in love with him? So share, kind of what were those first things that drew you to him? And then, is it easy or hard for you to show that tender love? Is it a challenge, or maybe it comes easier to you? Maybe for some of us, it's easier than others. And then last, I would love to ask really anyone, unmarried or married, how did tonight's talk, or maybe even just those questions when you go through the discussion, talking with other women and hearing about their marriages, how did that change your perspective on marriage? So we're going to take about the next 25 minutes or so and discuss through those, and then we're going to close in prayer. So go ahead and take the time to talk with your tables now.